Welcome to The Explainer. Let's just jump right in today because our source material addresses something so real right now, that collective fatigue, that low-level panic, and just the sheer exhaustion setting in as we navigate the intense shakings of mid-2026. The texts we are looking at today don't offer cheap platitudes, you know? Instead, they hit us with a massive paradigm-shifting framework called the throne perspective. It's literally about completely resetting how you and I view the chaos unfolding around us.
So let me ask you a question. What is actually dictating your confidence right now? Is it the headlines or is it heaven? Our source material throws this exact question right out of the gate to just jar its audience out of a passive survival mode. Seriously, are you letting your internal peace get violently dragged around by every single negative news notification buzzing on your phone? Because the texts point out a huge trap here. When we let earthly realities act as the master of our internal faith, we are literally setting ourselves up for a constant state of anxiety.
And that brings us to a fundamental choice presented in the framework. On one side, we've got the ground perspective. The source describes this as totally fear-driven. It's super reactive to the endless news cycle, and it just traps individuals in this loop of anxious survival. That's the fatal flaw right there, letting ground-level chaos dictate ultimate reality. But on the flip side, we have the throne perspective. This approach is authoritative. It's anchored in truth, and it moves us from constantly reacting to actually proactively governing. The radical shift the source proposes is simple, but man, it's profound. We need to lift our camera angle. We've got to stop looking from the ground up and start looking from the throne down. Acknowledge the reality on the ground, sure, but view it from a much higher authoritative vantage point.
Okay, moving on to our next section, Heaven Opened, the New Paradigm. We're taking a bit of a cinematic turn here. The specific text our sources use to anchor this whole new paradigm is Revelation 19:11, I saw heaven opened. Let's just slow down for a second and take in the historical context they provide. When the early church was under immense pressure, asking who was actually going to win, God's answer wasn't to hand them a secret escape pod to flee the earth. No, the answer was an open heaven. The text argues that God's response to extreme global pressure isn't retreat, it's a massive revelation of ultimate authority.
The source text then continues with this intense imagery of a king riding a white horse, and our sources are super clear on how to interpret this. This is not the climax of some Hollywood apocalyptic disaster movie where everything just blows up for the sake of, cinematic destruction. The framework insists this king isn't showing up to bring meaningless devastation. Instead, he's arriving to actively restore true justice and order. The ultimate goal outlined here isn't annihilating the world. It's the meticulous, intentional restoration of a deeply broken system, bringing it right back to its original design.
All right, let's look at the 3 rules of the throne.
Rule number 1. To really grasp this new operating system, the source material lays out 3 distinct rules. And listen, they don't frame these as polite suggestions. These are unshakable spiritual realities designed to help individuals take absolute command of their mindset. So, the first crucial point is this. History is under his control. The text argues that no matter how derailed the economy looks or how totally chaotic society feels right now in the thick of mid-2026, history has never, not for a single second, slipped from the sovereign grip of the king. The bold assertion here is that humanity isn't just randomly floating in some chaotic void. According to this framework, the timeline is firmly held by the throne. Okay, moving seamlessly to rule number 2. This next principle is essentially the decoder ring for the intense global turmoil described in the texts. Shakings are within his order. Now, I know that sounds totally paradoxical at first glance, right? But the sources explain that the reliable systems, the resources, the institutions society leans on, they aren't being shaken just to cause random senseless panic. Actually, scratch that. It's more like they are being shaken specifically to tear down false, unreliable scaffolds. The text suggests the real goal of all this shaking is to strip away what simply cannot last, essentially forcing a return to the only true, unshakable foundation.
And that brings us to rule number 3. This is really the final hammer blow of this entire perspective.
The ultimate end is secured. The framework absolutely insists that humanity is not running blindly into an abyss. The victory? It's already locked in. The true destination outlined in these texts isn't some dystopian wasteland. It's described as a glorious new heaven and a new earth. The sources posit that when you actually know the final score, it completely changes how you play the game today. The challenge presented by the text is to stop playing out of this fear of losing and instead start operating from a position of guaranteed victory.
Which leads perfectly into our final section, activating kingdom governance.
So how do the sources suggest we actually take these deep theological rules and mobilize them in our day-to-day lives? Well, they use the concept of a key. This represents ecclesia. It beautifully illustrates the text's core argument. Believers aren't meant to be passive victims just trying to survive a storm. According to this framework, they are called to be kings and priests, endowed with the actual, literal authority to open doors and release heavenly order exactly where they are, whether that's in a specific industry, your workplace, or right in your local community.
And the sources define ecclesia as a heavenly governance ecosystem on earth. So what does that mean? It means the mandate isn't just to hide out within the four walls of a building, acting purely as priests who pray. The text directly challenges its audience to step out into society, acting as kings who actually govern. The mission is to build and establish kingdom ecosystems that actively bring order, ethics, and justice straight into the marketplace. Now, the text anchors this heavy governance mandate not in some sort of anxious religious striving, but purely in relationship. They quote Haggai 2:23, "I will make you a signet ring, for I have chosen you." Think about that. Historically, a signet ring represents a mark of absolute authority and identity. The premise here is that you don't get this authority by working yourself to the bone to earn it. It is described as a permanent, irrevocable covenant seal of love. Ultimately, the source argues that true authority comes from knowing exactly whose seal of love you carry.
All of this culminates in what the source describes as the ultimate posture for mid-2026, walking steadily on the heights. The picture painted by the text is this: while the rest of the world is frantically reacting to every single breaking news alert in total fear, the person operating with this throne perspective stands in absolute stability. They aren't paralyzed, they are still moving forward, but they are walking steadily above the chaos, because their foundation, according to this framework, simply can't be shaken.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly stark challenge posed by our source material. Will you drop an earthly survival manual and take up your governance mandate? It's a crystal clear call to stop reacting to ground-level panic, elevate that camera angle, and start actively leading and operating from the throne perspective. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. I really hope diving into these texts gives you a powerful, fascinating new lens for navigating the days ahead. See you next time.